Me again with my short review of Magician's Apprentice. I really enjoyed this book. There are a lot of good stuff. There are some bad stuff. But I am intrigued and want to continue the series, of course, after I read the Empire trilogy. I read this book because I am joining a read-along over at Mike's Book Reviews Discord server for the Empire trilogy, and I wanted some context for both Kelawon and Midkemia, both realms that the story itself takes place in. So I started to read Magician Apprentice, which is actually half of the first book of the Rift War saga. But I probably will continue after I have read the Empire trilogy, maybe after I've read Daughter of the Empire. I don't know, it depends on how quickly I breeze through it. But let's continue on to the good. We have Pug and Thomas, our main characters. They are very lovable. Pug is an orphan that was actually raised by the entire town, but he was taken special care of by the cook, and the cook is Thomas's father, so they're de facto brothers, and they're best friends for life. While Thomas is more of a fighter and a great sword fighter, especially for his age, Pug is not really great at anything, to say the least, and he's kind of the underdog, even at the point where they're, how should I put this, rite of passage is where all of the merchants and swordmasters and craftsmen get together and they pick their apprentice out of all of the youths, all of the boys and girls from a certain age group every year. And in the year that Pug and Thomas both get or have to be picked, Pug is left last and is not picked. Yet at the last second, Colgan comes in, and Colgan is the magician for the Cryde court, where he was raised, where Pug was raised. So he's actually the apprentice to the magician, hence, of course, the book title. So he's kind of an underdog versus the bigger, better, faster, stronger, confident friend, which is a nice dynamic between both of those kids. So that's something that I really liked about it. I actually liked the characters in general, and we get introduced to a lot of them. Some of those are very one-dimensional, but they do fit the overall story, while others are a bit more explored, is the word, a bit more elaborated on as well. Because we also see them age, which is something I'll come back to later. But we see them actually develop, even though they're side characters. We see them getting arcs and development, so that's a good point as well. It was also paced very well, at least this part of the book. Coming to a close in 19 or 18 chapters. I think it's 19 when you include the prologue. It started out as this coming-of-age story for Pug and Thomas, but it turns into a bigger story about dealing with an invading force, because the Rift War saga is, of course, about a war caused by a rift. And what happens when there's a rift? People go through it. So it's kind of like a portal fantasy, where instead of someone from our world gets portaled into another world, it's a portal between two distinctly different worlds that are not Earth, or not our world as it is. And of course, when cultures clash, what happens? 99% of the time, there's a war. So the story is actually about Pug and Thomas's country, or world, Midkemia, dealing with the invading force of the Tsurani warriors, and they hail from Kelawon. So the story progresses a bit, and it's something that is a nice, I'm not going to say twist because it's very progressive, but it's a nice touch to it because it's something that actually happens quite naturally. The last 2 chapters are also great, and the last few pages. Well, the last 3 chapters are this battle / siege where we see the castle that Pug grew up in, and some love interests and some older side characters that we have met through over the course of the book, have a big face-off with the Tsurani warriors. And at the end, I think the last 3 pages or something like that, we see long scene, not really, but we see a scene from the point of view for the first time of one of the Tsurani warriors. So that's very interesting, especially for me, considering I'm going to read the Empire trilogy, because it actually offers a bit more insight and intrigue to the political world of Kelowon, where the invaders hail from. There's also a lot of traveling, which is something at first sight I groaned, because traveling in lots of books is actually not that great. It feels slow, or at least it slows down the story. In this case, not really. He knows where to cut and say like, okay, we have this interesting scene during the traveling, let's say 2-3 days, and then he just cuts, and suddenly they're 2-3 weeks ahead, or even months in some cases. So he knows when and where to cut, which makes them a bit slower, sometimes a bit faster even, because of some of the action that happens, but they never bog down the book as, for example, in Eye of the World. And in this case, it's not. It doesn't feel slow, it doesn't feel repetitive, it just feels like a natural part of the story, which is perfect for traveling. We also have, of course, well, I've already mentioned some characters that are I've already mentioned some characters that develop throughout the book. Some of those side characters that we meet in the beginning actually turn into, I'm not going to say main characters, but they do turn into something more important and integral to the story later on in later chapters. So that's something that I enjoy as well, exploring more and more characters, which brings me to the next point of world building, because we explore a lot of characters, but we also explore several different races. We have elves and dwarves and dark elves, and we have the Tsurani warriors with their strange beasts and strange customs and all that. We have, of course, our own different kingdoms, the dwarf kingdom, the elven kingdoms, the mountains, and everything around that. So I don't really remember a lot of exposition, which means that even though there was exposition or info dumps, they did not have a big impact, which means that they were not either forced or that they were built into the story in a natural way. Something that I also enjoy, and probably most of you enjoy, because nobody likes an info dump. So yeah, that's one of the good points as well. I think I have like 5-6 good points by now. The plot also branches out. We have Pug and Thomas, and they get separated after going into the mines of Moria, which is something I'll elaborate on later. But they get separated, and we see Pug going the way with the king, or with the duke, I'm sorry, while Thomas goes back with the dwarves, and he kind of lives there and is integrated into dwarf society. Pug, on the other hand, goes with the duke to the king. And those are 2 parts. And then, of course, we have the third part of the story, which happens back at where we started in Crydi, or in Crydi, or however it's pronounced. We have their battle against the actual Tsurani warriors. So these are 3 distinct parts of the story, which are all equally interesting, and they all make me want to read on and continue the series, which is, of course, the point of a book or a book series. But they also make me want to continue onto the Empire trilogy. So they branch out. They make me intrigued enough, so I have to branch out. The Empire trilogy and the Rift War, which happens about at the same time. Apparently, I haven't read them yet, so I can't tell you. But they happen parallel to each other, apparently. We'll see about that in a few weeks when I finish. As I've mentioned, of course, the good world building. The magic system is not that... It's not explained, actually, for now. We see some magic. We see some magic that is supposed to be impossible. Of course, because the book is always about someone special. Who wants to read a book about someone that is normal? But the world building, as I mentioned, the mines of Moria, there are actually some great mines. I can't for the life of me remember, but they traverse the mines and they get ambushed in those mines. That's why it reminded me of the mines of Moria. But to be honest, even though I thought it was similar, I didn't mind because I was very fond of the scenes in Moria, and it's something that kind of fills me with a bit of nostalgia, even though I have never read that book before. So it's kind of like this little comfort zone, and I love it. It's kind of derivative, but it's executed in a good way, in a different way even, because it's not as dark as the Mines of Moria, or as I remember the mines at least. It's in a different kind of tone than that scene in Lord of the Rings was. The last thing on my mind right now that is actually very good was the prose. But not very good, I mean, you can see that it's aged because it's been written 40 years ago, give or take, but it kind of reads like modern prose in the sense that I'm not going to say it's modern, I'm not going to say it's classic. I think timeless is a better word, because it's old and you can see it's old sometimes, but it has this modern feel to it. I never once in reading this book thought, oh god, it's so old or it's so ancient, or no. The best way to actually discover it is to read it yourself. Just read one chapter or even a small excerpt of it, and you'll notice that even though it's been written 40 years ago, it's relatively up to date. But that was it for the good parts. We unfortunately also have some bad parts, as with every book I've ever read. Let's start with the characters. Our main characters even. Both Thomas and Pug vanish about 2/3 of the book in, maybe 3/4. And that's something I found weird, because they're the main characters and suddenly they're just not there. On the other hand, this would probably be less of a point if I would have read Magician in its entirety instead of only Magician Apprentice, because we all know Pug comes back and Thomas probably also comes back. But as I've already mentioned, the reason I have read Apprentice was not for the Rift War saga, which is something I'll follow up with later, but it was to gain context for the Empire trilogy. So while this is on the bad side, I think the only reason that it's on the bad side is because of my choices. So this one is a bit on the edge, let's put it that way. It should have never been split either, speaking of. I believe, how should I put this? I think he should have made this one book. Well, he did, but I mean, it should have stayed one book, where the chapters that did not have Thomas and Pug in them should have been maybe a novella, even. That should have been read after the first book between Magician and, what's its name, Silverthorn, with maybe some mentions here and there of it in, of course, magician, to give us a bit of context for it. It is relevant to the story, of course, because otherwise the publishers would have never put it in there. But on the other hand, I think this should have been a novella, because this actually follows more of a battle scene. It follows the build-up to a war, and yeah, it should have been just mentioned in the book, where we have the entire story of Pug and Thomas just continue on and continue on, even after, spoiler alert, even after he's captured and taken back to the world of Kellowan, Pug that is. We should have had his story on one hand and then Thomas on the other hand, so we have this nice split still in the books of Midkemia and Kellowan, while the third part of the story, the battle slash war slash siege, should have been this separate novella, so we could actually read Pug's story and Thomas's story all in one go, and then afterward just read these, 50, 60, 70, 100 pages. I don't know how many pages there are, but you know what I mean. So that's something that I mean, I like the chapters in itself, I like the story in itself, but I just did not like how it changed. I think it would have been better to make it just one big story and then take that, just, yeah, it's like editing a movie. You have this story and then you condense it to one big story, and the other part is just this episode for a TV show or a special or something that you put at the end. Something like that would have been a lot better. Speaking of Pug, I also think he was a bit too mature for his age in some ways. There is this romance which is on the one hand a bit believable, but on the other hand it's not. Just because I think, well, he's supposed to be a teenager and he says and does things that teenagers don't do. We've all been there. We all know what a teenager does or how a teenager feels or stuff like that. And it was just not that great. I think Pug is a bit too mature in the book, as I've already mentioned. I mean, it does not hurt his character. It hurts this romance. Even though it's short-lived, it kind of hurts it and makes it negligible even. But that being said, I think I'm at the last part. The last part is, or the last bullet point is, as I've already mentioned as well, it's kind of derivative. You know, we have the wizard, the weird wizard, the quirky wizard, we have the brave dwarves, the honorable elves, the remote elves, the hoarding dragon. Yeah, it's chock full of tropes and cliches. So that is something, if you look deeper at it, you'll think, okay, yeah, it's repetitive, it's derivative. I do have to admit, it does stand out. But on the other hand, it did not bother me while reading. It's only after thinking about it that I just had this notion of, yeah, maybe, okay, and that, yeah, okay, so yeah. It's somewhat derivative. It's even highly derivative in some cases. But it depends on how you look at it. I mean, yeah, it didn't matter to me because I enjoyed the story overall, the repetitiveness and all, or derivativity and all. I don't even know if that's the word, but yeah. That's it for today, guys. I think I have said everything I wanted to say, and I really look forward to continuing on. I will probably even read Daughter of the Empire today. By the time this video goes up, I will probably already have read a few chapters of it. We'll see each other hopefully on Thursday for the video about Sanderson's secret project number 3. Depending on how the spoiler stream goes on Tuesday, which will be Wednesday for me, considering my time zone. And then next week I'll probably make another video about the Empire trilogy, with a bit of luck. It might take me 2 weeks, but we'll see then. I'll keep you posted, guys. Mission accomplished. Bye bye.